for Spanish people, that's probably your timing of your lunch is not quite right. And, but we were just joking. This is probably a late breakfast for you. But it's interesting, isn't it? How I mean, when I've been on holiday a lot in Spain, and with my family, and we tend to get in the Spanish way. We eat late, we get up late, so it's. But in like lunch with me, it's usually some sandwiches that I tend to work. Anyway, what we're going to do now, I must admit I've gone on a bit quicker than I thought. So we'll be finishing probably sooner. So I'm going to go through the rest of the talk on the standards first. And there's quite a lot still to discuss in the different standards on QA. And when I finish that, I just want to spend a while, and there's some of the documents going around there. So this is at the end, because I'm going to talk a bit about the standards for visitors, for experts, those of you especially who would like to join the EasyVet teams. Right, so let's proceed. If you remember, and we were just finished standard 3, and we're now just going to be talking a bit about, just to remind you of why we're doing this. We're looking at the different standards and some of the QA things that you should seriously think about making sure you have got in your SCRs, in your base room, and in your structure, your committee structure, when they meet them. Okay. Oh, wrong one. Got it upside down. There we go. First of all, standard 4. Equipment obviously must be replaced. It must be maintained and restored. All the facilities and equipment. I would also include things like lecture theatres. And I think from a QA point of view, under this standard, showing the visitors that there is a strategy in place for financing and for organising these upgrade and maintenance. This is a QA process. That's all the quality assurance means that yes, you've got them, they're very beautiful, but what is this? How do you maintain them? And have you got a strategy for new equipment that you want to get in? Is there some finance provided for it? So it's all to do about strategies, isn't it? It's showing on paper that as far as standard 4 is concerned, you do have a strategy for those things. So let's see. The fact that you have them is not a QA thing. It's you have them to deliver the teaching outcomes, fine. The QA is looking after them. That's the QA bit. The visitors will need to show either a bit in your SCR, or certainly in the base room, evidence that this is done. It might be you have an agreement with a manufacturer or company who provide maintenance of equipment. Fine. If that is done, mention it. If the visitors find that you may have some very nice equipment, but you haven't got anything in place to look after it, etc., none of that, that could well be seen as a major deficiency from the QA point of view. We touched on this a bit this morning. So again, I'm re-emphasizing the fact here. My experience with EasyVet visitations, biosecurity and biosafety is all important. So biosafety is to do very much with infectious disease, making sure that the students and staff and support staff do not get exposed to any particular zoonotic problem. That's biosafety.
and that you can see in handling. We talked a bit about salmonella in horses this morning, just an example, but there are lots of other things as well. There are potential problems with infectious disease, and certainly students going out to get experience in the field, what we discussed earlier, EPT, some simple rules on biosafety on it. I mean, obviously abattoirs are potentially highly dangerous places. So when students go out, you send students out, are there any rules and regulations concerning biosafety? So there needs to be a well-organised approach to that. Biosecurity is really, again, you could argue that that also includes infectious disease, but biosecurity is very much in a laboratory, or the access to eye washes, access to making sure that somewhere you wash your hands, you wear gloves. It's all biosecurity from that point of view. Is there a way that you can only get into certain parts of the clinic or certain parts of the labs through a system of using your pass to waive it? Doesn't matter what the system is, but biosecurity means that there are securities in place to prevent movement or prevent infection. Well, not infection, I meant accidents. So accidents happen all the time. And I think biosecurity means that you've got in place. And again, if you are only dealing in Spanish speaking, then fine, it just has to be in Spanish, all these notices around the place. There are some experts I've noticed when they do their visit on Tuesday morning. They go as a group and they wander around everywhere. And I've noticed when I've been going around, some experts, they seem to spend their time looking to see where the eye washes are, the notices. Maybe they go over the top of it. But so please, it's an easy thing to do, is to make sure that your laboratories and your spaces where there are potential problems have got some means of biosecurity notices. And also the students and staff are given details of what they must do, responsible for. So that needs to be well organised. There needs to be leadership. Within the school, there must be one or more individuals who have the responsibility for biosafety and biosecurity. And they have the rules, and they can be, they would have enough power to insist that things are changed. So you do need leadership within that one. Not necessarily the dean. The dean will have to be the top of at the end, but the dean has to appoint someone or someone's people to actually help on that. So leadership in that area is important too. And that again is a QA business. And if there, again, both of these are missing in a visitation, there's no well-organised approach, that no one seems to be in charge of pushing this, that will definitely be perceived by the EasyVet team as a major deficiency. And the QA, it'll be QA, and the QA person will be asked for advice. They'll be questioning that as well. If you do have any external documentation, I can think of one immediately, laboratories. When you're doing diagnostic laboratories, most diagnostic laboratories will work to a certain standard, which may be a national or international standard. And if that is, your labs that are working to that standard, that is seen as external QA for that particular field. Do mention it. Please do mention that. Anything that is externally assessed in any of the things you do, like that, make a note. In addition, of course, we talked about, again this morning, how, at least in Madrid's concerned, you're going to have a visitation soon from your national agency, and others will do the same. So again, if you have the regular visitations from your national agencies, make sure that that is documented. What did they say? What did you do about their criticisms? All that needs to be followed, and I would definitely put quite a bit of that in the SCR let alone in documentation on it. An ISO certification in labs, etc., as I just mentioned. We have more of a problem that we began to get into it this morning with the quality assurance in the veterinary teaching hospital. I think this is due to the fact that there is so much variation in Europe on the teaching hospital. We go from one extent where they have no veterinary teaching hospital, all the way where they have some fantastic new hospital, who would often have their own QA processes within that hospital. And if you haven't got a hospital, you obviously can't have any QA processes in veterinary teaching. And the point I make with that sort of school is, how are they looking at QA in the teaching establishments, the practices, whatever that they use, instead of their clinics? It's almost impossible. We talked a bit this morning about how really difficult, I think it was your question, of QA in thousands of veterinarians in practice. Impossible. Well, it's pretty difficult also if you've just got, let's say, 10 practices, but you know, just doing QA with those 10 different practices, small animal, equine, so it's very difficult. So I think you have to look at your own situation. If you don't mind me using Madrid as an example, because I'm here, but Madrid has its own teaching hospital, honestly. And so I think the EasyVet visitations, the visitors, will be looking at it in terms of what is the quality assurance, in terms of the deliverables within that hospital. So that you can't expect the SOP to come up with this standard, with these other regulations, because of what I said. It varies so much. There are some hospitals, especially I've seen in some of the new countries coming into the EU, in the East, old Soviet republics, and they do struggle because they are only just starting to develop their hospitals. And you could argue that some of the quality assurance in there is very poor. So EasyVet, I think, has to take this into account on it. So it's a difficult one to write in. So what I would do is, whatever you've got, put into that, just put it in, because anything that is QA in terms of, for instance, the staff that you do it. I can remember sometimes if you have lots of staff, junior staff that are interns and residents, have got boarded exams. Have you got a strategy for getting them to become boarded in clinical specialities? And if there's a strategy like that and they succeed, then that is a QA. But the fact that you don't have it doesn't necessarily mean that you haven't got that QA, because you might, as I'm saying to you, just beginning to develop your own hospital. So it's a variable one, that one. Right, let's move on to Standard 5. This is obviously unique to veterinary schools, and ESG 2015 doesn't really mention anything about animals, honestly. But if the visitors feel that there is insufficiency within this one, and I can think of a lot of insufficiencies, everything from there are no animals at all, there's no handling of the students in the early days, haven't got animals available to learn handling, right through and to the clinics, right through to the clinics. Are there enough cases? Are there enough post-mortems in the paraclinical area? There's many, many. And that is all covered by the EasyVet indicators. So the indicators, those of you who perhaps don't fully know the SOP, these are statistical analysis at the end of your SCR, which shows how many animals, cases, post-mortems, how many animal resources have been used per student. And the data should be for the last 3 years. So, and that is clearly indicated in the SOP. If for any reason there's a problem with it. Again, I think of one school we're recently at, where there were hardly any horses. It's not their fault, it's just there weren't enough horses. And so, in theory, you could argue that they weren't actually reaching the indicators. But they put up a good argument about why that was. They put up a good argument about what they were doing to rectify it, in terms of having their own horses. So they may not have enough clinical cases, but they certainly had got their own stables with the handling, etc. They could do the basic, but they were lacking clinical cases. But their argument was, well, we don't have that amount of horses in the country that I was thinking about. And that they have to take that on board. There's nothing you can do about it. An interesting one, by the way, was that, has anyone been to the veterinary school in Jerusalem? No? Israel has one veterinary school in Jerusalem. I was there recently, and I was quite surprised actually, because I've been to quite a few veterinary schools in Turkey as well. And the one in Israel has, it does quite a lot of teaching on pigs. It teaches the students pigs in terms of their physiology, their diseases, and clinics. And I thought, oh, I was always brought up the fact that pigs, as far as the Jewish faith are concerned, were no. But what I learned something, so I can pass on, you may know this, but if not, I can teach you. Because I asked this question, I said, what on earth have you got all this pig diseases for in Israel? Because the restaurants you don't serve pork or bacon or anything. And they laughed and they said, well, you may not know this, but about 10 years ago, we had over 1 million Jewish people came in from Russia. And I remember that actually. There was an enormous influx from the East, Russia, into Israel. And the fact that I didn't know, that the Russian Jews actually eat a lot of pork and bacon. I had no idea that. And so the Israeli veterinary school has responded to that because they've got so many Russian now, and they provide that. So, and I was a bit puzzled. They told me then, they said, Philip, what you've got to remember is that when you visit these farms, I did, the pigs are very comfortable, but they're all on slats. Lots of straw, but all on slats. As long as the pig doesn't touch the holy ground, you're okay. So, I mean, I'm not joking, that's what they said. And it was in a way, I think it's a good example of how, and in Turkey, by the way, some of the schools like Istanbul, because they have so many tourists, or used to, they are having to provide a lot of meat for the tourists. So it's a good indication that how national rules, national susceptibilities have to be taken in by EasyVet. We have to take account. We can't expect, I think, a lot of schools that have a strong Muslim or Jewish foundation to teach the things that we teach. Why? Because they have a different religion, and so the EasyVet will always, I think, take account of this. Anyway, so let's get back to this one. So within your own country, and your own rules, if you do not provide enough animal resources, and teaching material of animal origin, which we're really talking about anatomy or post-mortems at this stage, then that could be seen as a deficiency. And that would be picked up quite quickly by the indicators on it. And that would definitely be a QA area if the figures don't match up. Yeah, so a number of animals encounters a learning resource. What you must do, I've seen it happen again, that when a student visits a farm, some of the indicators showed a huge number of cows seen by individual students. There's no way that a student could have seen that many of cows. When we questioned it, what the establishment was doing, if a student visited a farm with 600 dairy cows for a herd health visit, which is an analysis, they counted 600. You can't do that. The students did not actually physically see 600 cows. They may have done a herd health, and that's the reason you'll see now herd health is often covered separately within an assessment. And so you can't put in that amount of cows. So again, it has to be a sensible approach into counting animals. So for QA, the establishment must have a method of checking these numbers on a yearly basis. Are we achieving what we wanted to do, be it anatomy, postmortems, treatment of horses, or neutering of dogs, whatever? Are we achieving what we said we'd achieve? And for QA, it's just the fact that you've checked it. You've checked it. And if it's dropping, what are you going to do about it? That's the cycle again, the PDCA cycle coming on here. Now, how are you going to correct it? And if you don't have all these methods for doing this, that would be seen as a major deficiency, certainly in the understanding and practice of QA, quality assurance. Right, standard 6, learning resources. So I'm quoting here from standard 11.6 CFG. The establishment must have appropriate funding for learning and teaching activities and ensure that adequate and readily accessible learning resources and student supported are provided. Well, that's a long way of just saying that you have a system that both the lectures are available online for the students. The students have availability to journals and books, often online or maybe within a library. Wi-Fi is available in the campus. Wi-Fi could well be available in dormitories. I'd understand your dormitories here, dormitories where they sleep are separate. They're back in the city, I think, aren't they? So I guess that if they have Wi-Fi, it's their own Wi-Fi provided by the facility. A lot of schools have their dormitories accommodation on site, and that's quite useful because they have set up a whole Wi-Fi system which makes it easier for the students, without paying for it, to have direct access to it. It was a good idea. More difficult for us anyway, and I think for you, where the students tend to live outside, then you have to rely on them having access to Wi-Fi. All students, of course, I guess here is no different, will have their own login to get access to it, so they, wherever they are in the world almost, they can have access straight into what is provided under a learning resource by their parent veterinary school. Sometimes courses are provided on e-learning, where they actually is also, and there's a lot of these courses now coming, and I can see all these things, people changing and sending e-learning courses. We swap. We swap is the right English word. Courses that we might have developed for a particular teaching situation with other universities who've developed a different one. But we can both learn it. Rather than us both do the same one, why not actually just change it and swap? And so everyone gets a chance to do this. It's easier in our country because we all speak in the same language, but it's possible. So I think the QA aspects within that is simply showing that there is sufficient funding provided, as well as all these things are available. So you just basically list what is available in this standard on it. A difficult one, I think, sometimes is basically student support. Most students will have their own laptops now. Now, I don't know about you, but we do not provide any IT backup. If the students' computers fail, or if that's their problem, they have to look after it themselves. I've known some schools actually give their students an iPad or something when they first go in the first year. We don't do that, but others do. So it's interesting, though, that while you have support for your own computers that students have access to in your IT department, and you can show that that is occurring, the fact that you don't offer support to individual student computers is not a problem. That really wouldn't be expected on it. So that's quite a lot of QA written into that learning resources, into it. Right. Student support. In a way, I'm going to do this also under the student welfare and the why, because QA says, well, do you analyse what students need. So a student might say, we do not have enough access to do neutering of dogs, bitch space. We don't have any. Please can we have more? And there must be a system of a student request like that being given to the faculty. And also, what was the decision by the faculty, and is that fed back to the students? They may not be able to afford. I'm sorry, we just don't have enough dogs. Nothing we can do about it. But sometimes you could do something about it. So student requests is seen very much as a QA. The fact that they can do it, and that it goes to this place to be discussed with students, and then there is feedback back to the students on it. That's pure QA. QA, again with standard 6. This is where we certainly at Bristol would have to take note of this, where standard 6, where we have got another agency within our own university, central university policy on QA, does affect us. And this is quite a good way under learning resources to put evidence of what happens. Do they have any influence on you at all? If you're a freestanding university, okay, you've got it yourself, but if you're not, what influence do they have? Also, this now comes into student admission progression welfare standard 7, which is a pretty important one for QA. Learn. What did I do there? Oops, it's all right. Okay, the QA expert coming on in the EasyVet team, they're going to want to see the flow chart of the 3 years data I talked about, of all the above progresses. So admission, progression of the students, what happens to them, do they go on to the next year? If not, why not? Do they finally qualify? And finally the welfare. What evidence have you got for the welfare of the students? And the welfare covers not only their personal welfare, in terms of maybe the tutoring system you run on it, but also in terms of their health. Do you provide any help with help for students or advice? So the QA person will definitely be looking at that during the review. Part of that is students coming in the first place. Schools in France, in the UK, for instance, do their selection before year 1. They have the power to decide who comes into their school. That is not the situation in a lot of other European countries, where legally they have to take in a certain number of students in their first year, and then provide some choice through exams in who goes on and doesn't go on. So selection processes will vary. For those schools who do the selection themselves, is the QA saying, well, what have you got in place for, in these selection processes, that they are appropriate? I think it's a great shame for students who start off in a course. I was thinking, for instance, just recently, I'm sure they won't mind me saying, in Latvia, where they have to take a certain number of students in their first year, and then after the exams, a certain number then go on into the veterinary course. And they were saying that the students who actually are not committed in those first 1 or 2 years to veterinary science, they're not committed to it. They're there because it was a course, and their exam results at school drove them in that direction. But actually they didn't really want to be vets. And it wasn't until they get into their 3rd, 4th and 5th year that they are then teaching